After years of being criticised for failing to protect civilians, UN troops in the war-torn Democratic Republic of Congo are now being allowed to go on the offensive. Led by a former Brazilian commando, the Forces Intervention Brigade has already helped the government defeat M23 rebels. Now they're targeting other armed militias. But can they really bring peace to this troubled country?
In a land awash with weapons and violence, one man is on a mission to change peacekeepers into peacemakers. Brazilian General Carlos Santos Cruz. For the first time in the history of the United Nations, international troops are allowed to take the initiative and use force against rebel groups to defeat and disarm them. They've been sent here to the Democratic Republic of Congo.
We have a mandate to neutralize armed groups. And then, when we finish one, immediately we move ahead to continue our obligation.
General Santos Cruz wants the armed groups hiding in the forests and mountains to understand his mission.
We are going to protect the civilians, eliminate and neutralize the threats. We go to the threat. We are not going to wait the threat to come here against the civilian.
But can he bring peace to a nation scarred by years of fighting and war?
We need to promote the human rights even by force. That's our role here, to bring peace even by force if needed.
He doesn't underestimate the task ahead. He knows the stakes are high.
One mistake in one shot, kill or you injure the wrong person, that's the risk. The success to this disaster, you have a very thin line.
All over Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, soldiers are preparing for the day ahead. The Congolese National Army, known as the FARDC. The newly deployed United Nations Force Intervention Brigade, the FIB. And General Carlos Santos Cruz, a 62-year-old commando from Brazil. He's the current force commander for the United Nations mission in Congo, MONUSCO, in charge of over 20,000 troops from 50 different nations.
He's a really tough man, but it's great. I'm lucky he's double of my age.
Eastern Congo has been engulfed in violence for nearly 2 decades, and the civilian population has borne the brunt of it. It's estimated that nearly 6 million people have died, and many hundreds of thousands have been wounded or raped. In March last year, the UN Security Council, after years of ineffective peacekeeping operations, decided to give UN forces in Congo a mandate to go on the offensive. As the man put in charge, General Santos Cruz was handed his toughest ever assignment.
The dimension of the human catastrophe we have here, the level of violence, we have millions of civilians dead in consequence of the conflict in the last years, more than all the conflicts in the world. Our challenge is to bring peace and to protect this population from the daily violence we have here.
Military operations are now in progress all over Eastern Congo to take on and defeat the many armed groups. They've had some successes, and they've had some setbacks, but it's an enormous change to a mission that's had much criticism in the past for its inaction.
The UN came in DRC in 1999, but within more than a decade, there was no change. Since this year, we have noticed a kind of change because of the defeat to the M23. We saw that finally the UN forces are really engaged on the side of the FRDC.
The UN says it's the end of the M23 rebel group in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
But though the fight against the M23 rebels may be over, there are several other militias that still pose a threat. At the UN headquarters in Goma, the regional capital, General Santos Cruz is keen to get this across to his commanders as they regroup before the next stage of their operation.
That's the objective. Return to the base, to make our troops much more operational, to advise the commanders with the operational issues, and to trying to have much more coordination with FARDC and PNC. We are not going to be limited to the classic problems we face normally. We are going to face all the problems without restriction.
The new mandate means that the UN is working very closely with the Congolese army. This is that army, the FARDC, and on the morning we caught up with them, they were about to head into battle.
Rendez-vous sur le terrain. Forces de frappe commando.
The operation was being led by one of the Congolese army's rising stars, Colonel Mamadou Ndela, credited with a leading role in the defeat of the M23 last November.
Nous vivons ensemble, nous mourons ensemble. Congo est un pays nabiso. Alors, c'était Congo. Congo est un pays nabiso. Tous les rébellions à Nord Kivu, toko beta pour la population nabiso à Congo est la kimia ba mama babanda trafic réglementaire. Rendez-vous sur le terrain. Tutakufa juu ya nchi yetu.
But as the vodka bottle suggested, the operation they were about to launch was deadly serious. A few days later, their commander, Colonel Mamadou Ndela, was killed in an ambush with 3 other soldiers when his vehicle came under rocket attack. Another casualty in Congo's long war. In the past, Congolese troops like these have been accused of committing human rights abuses against civilians. Yet with UN support during the recent defeat of the M23 rebels, they've cleaned up their act.
I saw the FARDC permanently taking action, fighting against M23 for 5 months in a row. And then it's visible, very visible, the improvement. We have very clear position on the human rights violations. We do not accept it's one conditionality to have the support from MONUSCO.
These are the men that give his words some weight. The new Intervention Brigade, voted into being by the UN Security Council last March. It's made up of 3,000 troops from South Africa, Tanzania and Malawi, with a mandate to neutralize and disarm the various armed groups.
Okay, morning, gentlemen. Welcome to the Kibirizi patrol briefing. We'll be leaving this base anytime from now for Kibirizi, where we'll be doing our reconnaissance.
This morning, Lieutenant Mataweri from Malawi is reminding his men of their rules of engagement.
If we get fired upon,
riflemen will return fire if one of our vehicles gets hit by, for example, RPG. Another vehicle from behind will give cover to that particular vehicle, and if you have any casualties, will be whisked away or moved from that particular area.
This is the first time since the birth of the United Nations in 1945 that the Blue Helmets can aggressively seek out an enemy. It's a historic decision. The men are part of a forward unit at Kibirizi in the national park. The UN needs to get the latest information on the militia's whereabouts to prepare for the next military offensive due to start at any time.
If we have credible information that the civilians will suffer in the hands of some armed groups, we have the freedom to take action, to anticipate the action of the armed groups.
There's one particular armed group in the UN sights for the next operation. It's called the FDLR. It came to eastern Congo 20 years ago after fleeing Rwanda. Its founders are accused of taking part in the mass killings of nearly 1 million people, the genocide in Rwanda of 1994. They've been attacking villages ever since. It seems they're close by.
Mnasema ambazo mnajua kwa FDLR inapatikana labda sehemu hii?
Hapana, hakuna grupu ya mengine, ni FDLR tu, mabiko na kikundi mbili. Barudi na bafoka. Hapa mbele yangu position mbili, foka na rudi. Na ingine force hapo moya nyuma yangu. Apepre mirangi.
Axe mirangi. Tuko na FDLR mbele na nyuma. Sisi tuko hapa.
After 2 decades, the rebel militia has put down roots in the region. Many local people married into the FDLR and had families together.
Si ule ba FDLR bashagawia hapa sana.
Mashamba za maraia ziko mopori kwenye FDLR zinadhibiti. Ni kusema wanakutanana. Ile ni mambo ya raia na FDLR.
The soldiers have had a successful meeting, and Captain Jakame has gathered information useful for the next military operation.
They have given us about 3 positions where, or locations where FDLR is found in the area. Every armed group knows that anytime now they will be disarmed forcibly. That's why we are busy, gathering intelligence so that we can carry out our operations in a thorough manner.
General Santos Cruz recognizes that this new ability to act must be treated with respect if the mission is to succeed.
Freedom means you need to have as well responsibility with the human rights, responsibility with the mandate, with the rules of engagement, with the international and humanitarian law.
It's a lesson he's learned the hard way. Previous engagements for the UN have included heading up a force that disarmed dangerous criminal gangs in Haiti.
I do my job based on some principles. We need to give initiative to our troops, to our staff. We need to be focused on our mandate and the rules of engagement. The motivation we have here is a psychological motivation. We do things for the people only. We fight for them.
Today, the general wants to see the results of a recent intervention brigade operation. He's going to Pinga. It's a remote village and difficult to access, so he's flying in by helicopter. He's asked the pilot to fly low so he can see the conditions of the roads and the forests where the armed groups are hiding.
Recently, 3 days ago, is one route that was released from the armed groups, the presence of the armed groups. And then we are going to observe the movement of the population along the roads, and we go to land in Pinga. Days ago, we occupied Pinga, and all the armed groups, they were defeated and fled the area. And then the population is returning. We estimate that about 2,000 families will return to Pinga.
First stop is a base manned by Uruguayan soldiers, fellow South Americans. The UN mission in Congo has had the responsibility to protect civilians for many years and has been heavily criticized for not doing so in the past. As survivors of atrocities in Pinga can testify. This woman, Aline, witnessed the leader of the militia group Mai Mai Cheka murder her husband in the most brutal way.
Sasa Cheka alifikaka pale na wasoda yake akakamata wanangu Salim kamataka pale akamkata kichwa. Sasa alikataka ile kichwa kakamata mkuki akaingiza ile kichwa. Choba kaenda wasoda yake wakaenda na ile kichwa biko natembea nayo. Ile soda alikuwa mbele na kamata ile mkuki biko naenda na biko natembea na siwacha tufunga kamba nyuma. Kichwa wakafaa siku mbili wiko nakitembeza mugini yote.
Here we have a long list of human rights violations. We have more than 300 cases of rapes, looting the house all the time. The population, 50% of the population abandoned the houses.
At the hospital, Kabuya is recovering from being raped. She also witnessed the atrocities of Cheka and his men.
Wanaenda mukazi, sasa wanaenda kule muvita kule, wataleta vichwa wa watu wanaitia hivi kumiti hivi. Jo watu wanashangaa vichwa vya watu hivi kuhimiti wanaingiza muti humu hivi. Kisha njo wanaenda wanavibeba hivi. Wakati watafika pale mubazi ya Monike pale, asemu kamate, nyenjo munakula nyama wanatupia vile vichwa.
While the UN soldiers did not intervene to stop the rape and murder of civilians, they did at least provide a refuge for people.
Juu MONUSCO ilisaidia watu mingi. Ilikuwa tu ni kusikia risasi la kwanza. Mbio watu yote. Wote na wanaishia mule Monike tu wanajificha mule. Tulikuwa mule walikuwa natusaidia. Sasa vita napigana tunakosa na wakati ya kutoka nje, wanatupatia walikuwa wanatusaidia hata na chakula.
But why didn't the UN do more to protect them?
I never tried to understand how UN worked before my arrival here. That for me it was not relevant. Since the moment I came here, I'm very focused on the problems I have in front of me and not what happened before. We are very happy to see along the roads, even in this rainy season, people returning to the houses you see abandoned for so long time.
This is 29. 29. Are you in contact with the coast side?
We just received information this morning that one of the armed group leader is hiding in the locality of this village over there. So we have been tasked to deploy and capture him.
This is an exercise to ready the troops. The UN Security Council created the Intervention Brigade for a trial one-year period. The experiment seems to have worked so far, but not without cost. To date, 3 blue helmets have been killed in action. Yet can the UN alone bring peace to this country?
We need to have much more like the presence of the states. It's a military action, police action, state authority, and development. We need to have a combination. Only the force is not the solution. We need to have in parallel development and state authority, or the problem will restart in some point.
It's still a beginning. That's why we think that the government of DRC should also snatch this opportunity now to train their troops and try to build its security sector so that this can be a lasting solution. Otherwise, it will be the same situation after 3 years, 4 years, 5 years after the FIB or MONUSCO has gone.
This was just a rehearsal, but these soldiers are ready to go into battle.
Because we have undergone so much intensive training, beginning from right away Malawi and here as well. So we are more than ready, in other ways, I can say.
We are ready for anything. If we receive an order to follow up any armed group, we are ready for that.
That is our posture that we are doing, that what we are practicing every day, that's the way we are motivating our troops to protect the population. We need to consider how important it is to isolate the problems inside Congo and not to let the armed groups cross the border because it affects the relationship between countries.
In this part of eastern Congo, there are still thought to be 30 or more militia groups, some of them from neighbouring Rwanda and Uganda, who terrorise the local population. The UN is using both carrot and stick in their battle to bring peace here.
Before the FIB started fighting, they spent about 2 months calling for rebels to come and to surrender. And they made a campaign of calling all these rebels to surrender, and so this they can avoid the worst.
So far, well over 2,000 militia, both men and women, have surrendered their weapons. They're now living in a makeshift camp on the shores of Lake Kivu. The process is known as DDR, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration.
There are 2 options for the ex-combatants. The first is to demobilize and accept to integrate the civil life, but in this case, they must be trained and they must be integrated in the community, but there is a process that must be followed.
Back in his helicopter, General Santos Cruz is keeping a close eye on what happens next, and he's called up the latest technology to help him. For the first time, the peacekeepers here are deploying unarmed surveillance drones to monitor rebel activity near the borders with Rwanda and Uganda. It's another sign that the UN is taking its role here seriously. But already halfway through his own 1-year appointment, the general knows that whatever progress towards peace his forces made, those gains are still very precarious.
When I leave DRC, I want to have the feeling that I helped to create a better situation, if not a better life, at least a better situation. But we need to work very hard to continue with the same level of results. Because if we rest a little, we are going to fail.